When I was 15, my father took me fishing at the lake for the first time. I still remember how the mist hugged the surface at sunrise, the air so still that it felt like the whole world held its breath. He handed me a rod, and in the silence that followed, I understood more about him than I ever had through words. That lake, and the small cedar cabin beside it, was where my father taught me about patience, about listening, about what it meant to care for something that couldn't speak water. Trees Earth. Now, decades later, I live here full-time. After retiring early from my career in water systems engineering, 26 years with the Bureau of Land Reclamation, I packed my life into a modest trailer, pulled it behind my rust-colored Dodge, and moved back into the cabin. It was still standing, weathered but solid, the porch creaking like it was glad I'd come home. I spent the first 6 months quietly restoring it, sanding old boards, resealing the windows, re-roofing by hand. I didn't hire help. I needed the work. I needed the quiet. After years of bureaucracy and meetings and projects that felt more like politics than science, the simplicity of hand tools and pine sap was a kind of salvation. The cabin sat just 30 yards from the water, down a gravel path shaded by sycamores. It wasn't large, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a screened-in porch overlooking the lake. There was no dock, just a wide patch of smooth stones at the shoreline where I'd still go fishing in the early hours like Dad used to. My neighbors were mostly seasonal folks with luxury second homes who came up for long weekends and left again. I didn't mind. They stayed out of my way, and I stayed out of theirs. But the HOA, that was a different story. I'd never lived under the thumb of a homeowners association before. Back when my father built the cabin in the late 70s, there was no such thing here. Just a few properties carved into the woods and an old county road leading in. But sometime in the early 2000s, developers bought up the land around the lake, built luxury houses, a community clubhouse, even a tennis court, and formed a formal HOA. Most of the homes clustered on the opposite side of the lake away from my cabin, but over time they expanded their grip across every inch of land touching the water. When I first returned, they didn't say much. I attended one meeting out of politeness, really, and realized quickly that I wasn't their kind of neighbor. I didn't drive a Tesla. I didn't attend wine and cheese mixers. I didn't install the regulation gray mailbox or post American flags on prescribed holidays. And I sure as hell didn't pay them $2,200 a year in dues. Why? Because I didn't have to. My cabin sat on a parcel of land that predated the HOA. And more importantly, it sat outside their jurisdiction. My property, and a narrow tract that ran beside it, including the gravel path that led from the road down to the lake, had never been included in their filings. That path, incidentally, was the only clear access to the water for their entire side of the neighborhood. A mistake in land division decades earlier had gifted me with that quiet power, though I never used it. I never needed to, until Karen came along. Karen Withers, HOA president since 2021, was one of those people who saw the world as a giant spreadsheet, rules violations, fines, and structures. She'd send quarterly letters highlighting community expectations in bold italics. At first it was small stuff, asking me to reconsider my exterior paint color, which was apparently not in harmony with the rest of the neighborhood. Then came notes about yard maintenance. I let the native grasses grow too tall, and concerns over unauthorized structures, which turned out to be my father's old woodshed. I ignored them, politely at first, then firmly, then not at all. I figured they'd get tired of me of wasting paper and stamps. But Karen wasn't wired that way. She saw my noncompliance as an infection. I didn't fit her vision of a tidy, rule-abiding lakefront utopia. And more importantly, I reminded her that there were limits to her authority. The first real confrontation came in the form of a certified letter. It claimed my cabin was built partially on common use easement, a legal fiction they'd cooked up based on a poorly drawn map from a landscaping proposal. I sent back a notarized copy of the original county plat map from 1978, which showed in crisp black ink that the land was mine. All of it. I heard nothing back for weeks. Then one Tuesday morning in late April, I woke to the sound of engines. I walked out onto the porch and found a crew of men in reflective vests unloading tools from a flatbed. One of them had already strung yellow caution tape across the edge of my property. A woman in a blue blouse and sunglasses was shouting instructions into a walkie-talkie. It was Karen. She didn't even look at me when I approached, just waved vaguely toward the cabin and said, "We've received complaints about a safety hazard. We're authorized to begin clearing any non-compliant structures immediately." I told her she wasn't authorized to touch a damn thing. That if she stepped so much as 1 foot beyond that gravel line, I'd call the sheriff. She smiled. "We've consulted legal counsel. You're welcome to do the same." And then before I could reach for my phone, I heard wood splinter. One of the workers following her orders had taken a saw to the support beams on the east side of my porch. Another began hauling boards into a pile like they were scrap lumber. They didn't have permits, they didn't have a warrant, but they had nerve. And in that moment, something broke in me. Not fear, not panic. Clarity. They had no idea what they'd just touched. And I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to scream or threaten. I was going to do what I'd done my entire career. Document, prepare, and strike only once. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear, no. I've known far worse than a neighborhood dictator with a clipboard and a superiority complex. But because of the hum. That low vibrating anger beneath my skin. The kind that doesn't yell or throw things but simmers until it sharpens into something cold-focused and dangerous. That cabin was my father's last gift to me. It was sacred, and they tore into it like it was a shed behind a Walmart. I spent the early hours walking the property with a flashlight checking every inch of damage. 2 porch beams sawed halfway through. Loose decking torn from the floor and stacked in a heap. My workbench, handmade walnut, built by my father's hands, was split clean down the middle like a log. I stood over it for a long time. Didn't even notice my knuckles were white until I finally let go of the grip on the flashlight. By sunrise, I had 57 photographs, 3 voice memos of Karen shouting, "Proceed with clearance," and a time-stamped video of the entire crew walking onto my property. My wildlife camera, normally used to monitor the foxes near the eastern tree line, caught everything in high resolution. Their bright vests, the license plate on the flatbed, and Karen herself pointing directly at the cabin. I forwarded it all to a Dropbox folder I named HOA War Log. Then I printed out copies of my deed, the original plat map, and the easement survey. 3 separate times each labeled, tabbed, and highlighted. Decades ago, I might have gone to court unprepared, but those years working in federal land use taught me better. Paper wins wars, and I had a mountain of it. Around 9:15 a.m., I drove into town. Coffee first, then the county clerk's office, then the zoning department. Everywhere I went, I kept things simple and respectful. I wasn't the angry old man with a grievance. I was the quiet landowner who had been here long before the manicured lawns and community newsletter. The clerk, an older gentleman named Roy, remembered my father. Said he used to fix their irrigation pumps back in the day. That was worth a handshake and a quiet "I'll help however I can." By the time I got back home, the yellow tape was gone, but the damage wasn't. A fresh envelope had been shoved into my screen door, notice of violations, non-compliant structure removal in progress. I could almost hear the smugness in the typed lines. They even had the gall to fine me $3,000 for obstruction of community maintenance efforts. That's when I knew Karen wasn't just clueless. She was escalating. And either she believed I wouldn't fight back, or she was confident the HOA could outmaneuver me through intimidation and legal noise. She didn't realize that what looked like a crumbling gravel path beside my cabin was in fact a wedge of power more valuable than she could imagine. See, years ago, before the HOA even existed, my father negotiated an easement deal with the county. He had installed and maintained a pump station that supplied water for wildfire protection. As part of the deal, the county gave him exclusive access to a narrow strip of land running from the main road down to the lake for utility and emergency use. When the HOA developers bought out surrounding properties, they assumed that strip was a public right-of-way. They used it to install benches, a kayak rack, and a picnic area just past the edge of my property. They even advertised direct lake access to homebuyers, including a scenic gravel walkway to the shoreline. But they never officially acquired the easement. They never filed a request to cross my land. Why? Because I never said anything. I let them walk it. Let the residents enjoy it. Because I believed in neighborliness. I believed in peace. Karen mistook that silence for weakness, and that's what made her dangerous. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening. Normally, I wouldn't bother showing up, but this time I did. I walked in wearing the same work boots I'd been restoring the porch in, still dusty, still stiff. The community clubhouse was packed, rows of folding chairs, plastic cups of wine, a table with HOA packets, and laminated rule books. Karen was standing near the front in her usual buttoned-up white blazer and pearl necklace like she was running for office. She spotted me and gave a tight smile. "Ah, Mr. Walker, here to discuss your recent non-compliance." I said nothing, just sat in the back row and waited. They started with the minutes from last month, then announcements. Karen went on about the annual Easter egg hunt and the summer landscaping budget, the usual fluff. But then, midway through a slide presentation on beautification compliance, she dropped it. "Lastly, we've taken steps to address an unsafe structure near the lakefront which has been in violation of easement use and aesthetics for some time." She clicked the remote. A grainy photo of my cabin mid-demolition appeared on the screen. "While we understand this property exists outside direct HOA membership," she continued, "our legal team has advised that community easement expectations extend to adjacent properties which impact common visual spaces or safety." I stood up, quietly. I walked to the front. "I have a question," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a blade. Karen blinked. "You'll need to—" I held up a manila folder. "This is the deed to my property, recorded in 1978. Here's the county survey, the easement agreement, and a copy of the HOA's own bylaws, which confirm that my parcel is not and never has been under your governance." People shifted in their seats. Murmurs rippled. I placed the folder on the presentation table. And here I added, "Pulling out another paper is a cease and desist letter drafted by my attorney, along with documentation of your unauthorized demolition, trespassing, and property damage. You'll find the video and timestamps in the Dropbox link on the final page." Karen's mouth opened, closed, opened again. The microphone squeaked. "I'll be posting a gate tomorrow morning," I said calmly, "across the path you've been using to access the lake. That easement is mine. And it's closed until further notice." Silence. Dead silence. Then someone in the crowd, a man I didn't recognize, asked, "Wait, the HOA doesn't have legal access to the lake." I looked at him, not without permission. Another voice, a woman this time. "But that's how we get to the clubhouse dock. That's where the kids fish. That's how we launch canoes." Karen tried to jump in. "It's all being resolved." I cut her off. "No, it isn't. It's being revoked." And with that, I turned and walked out. Let her swim in it. That night, I bolted the gate closed. I posted a sign. "Private property. No access without owner consent." They thought wrecking my cabin would push me into submission, but they didn't realize they'd just sawed off their own legs. The following morning began like any other, cool, silent, the lake glistening in the early light like a sheet of polished glass. But there was something different in the air. A tension subtle but unmistakable. The kind of tight stillness animals feel before a storm breaks. I felt it before I saw it. Around 7:15 a.m., I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I stepped out onto what remained of the porch and saw two HOA board members standing at the newly installed gate. One was Brent, a lawyer I believe always wore khakis, like they were a uniform. The other was Olivia, soft-spoken, usually deferential to Karen. But neither of them looked deferential this time. I didn't move, just stood there, arms crossed, watching. Brent called out, "Mr. Walker, we'd like to speak with you regarding yesterday's events." I didn't reply. I let them feel the full weight of the silence. "We believe this may be a misunderstanding," Olivia added, trying to soften the tension. "Surely there's a compromise that doesn't involve shutting down lake access for everyone." Now they wanted diplomacy. I walked over slowly, boots crunching on stone. "This misunderstanding," I said, "evenly resulted in criminal trespassing and destruction of private property. If any other compromises come with a chainsaw, I suggest you think again." Brent opened his mouth, then closed it. I could see the brief flicker of uncertainty, the realization that they'd stepped out too far too fast, and now the ground beneath them was crumbling. "I've already spoken to the sheriff," I added, "and filed the first report. This is no longer a matter of HOA compliance. This is civil liability, possibly criminal." Olivia swallowed. We didn't know Karen would take it that far. None of us approved demolition. I looked her square in the eyes, and yet none of you stopped it. That ended the conversation. By mid-afternoon, I'd noticed the signs of panic. 3 residents came by separately, asking if the lake was really closed. A father with 2 kids in life vests looked heartbroken when I confirmed the path was no longer public. One woman started to cry when I told her the HOA had never had a legal right to use it. By nightfall, I received a letter slipped under my cabin door, unsigned but neatly typed. It read, "You're hurting the whole neighborhood just to punish one person. Karen doesn't speak for all of us. Please reconsider." It was a plea, but not an apology. I burned the letter. The next day was quiet. Then Thursday morning I received a call. It was from Harold, the contractor I'd hired 2 years prior to repair the cabin's chimney. We'd remained friendly, and he still took on odd jobs for me when needed. "Hey, thought you'd want to know," he said. "One of my guys is working a job up near the clubhouse. Said he saw some volunteers loading demolition tools into a golf cart, heading your way." My stomach turned. By the time I got outside, it had already started. This time, there was no yellow tape, no official crew. Just a ragtag team of 3 men in jeans and HOA polo shirts, dragging boards from the back of my cabin and piling them near the woods. 2 more were taking measurements along the sidewall, muttering about code compliance and fire risk. And standing at the center of it all, Karen. She wasn't shouting this time. She looked calm, focused, determined. And that scared me more than anything else. "Step away from the cabin," I said loud enough to make them all freeze. "You're trespassing!" Karen turned her smile tight. "We're conducting a safety evaluation. This structure remains in violation of multiple county ordinances. We've submitted an emergency complaint to the zoning board." I didn't move, I didn't blink. "There is no emergency," I said, "except the one you've created." She took a step forward. "You're disrupting the community, Mr. Walker. You're isolating yourself, turning neighbors against each other. For what a grudge." I stepped closer. "For my land, for my home, for the memory of my father you bulldozed last week." Her face tightened, but she didn't back down. "The board is prepared to take legal action if this obstruction continues." I stared at her long and hard. "Good," I said, "because I already have." I pulled out my phone and hit play. The audio rang loud. In the stillness, Karen's own voice from the first demolition. "We've received complaints about a safety hazard. We're authorized to begin clearing any non-compliant structures immediately." The men in HOA polos looked at each other. Karen's confidence wavered. "That was recorded during your last illegal entry," I added. "I've submitted it along with security footage to my attorney and the county sheriff. And I've filed a temporary restraining order against the HOA's board leadership." Now she looked rattled. "Every piece of wood you touch is another count of vandalism," I continued. "And every footstep you take on this property is trespassing. I suggest you walk away." Silence. Then, one by one, the men began backing off. Olivia, who had arrived midway through and stood watching, whispered something to Karen. Karen snapped something back. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. Her body language said it all, panic disguised as pride. They left. But I knew this wasn't over. Sure enough, that night, I received a certified envelope at my P.O. box. A notice of intent to fine me $10,000 for intentional obstruction of community pathways and failure to maintain structures impacting shared lakefront aesthetics. It was absurd, it was grasping, and it reeked of desperation. I took the envelope home, scanned it, and added it to the Dropbox folder. Then I printed a copy, folded it neatly, and taped it to the new gate post. Below it, I added a handwritten note. And this is not a pathway, it's a boundary. Learn to respect it. Then I sat on what was left of the porch, watched the moon rise over the lake, and waited. Because the moment you deny a tyrant their illusion of control, they don't retreat. They unravel. There's a kind of stillness that only comes with confidence, the kind that settles in your bones when you know you're no longer the one reacting. That's what I felt as I sat on my porch that night, watching the lake reflect the stars like it always had long before the clubhouse, the paddleboards, the HOA newsletters. They thought they'd backed me into a corner. What they didn't realize was that this was my ground. I knew every inch of it, not just physically, but legally, strategically, and historically. And more than that, I knew the system they were trying to use against me better than they ever could, because I helped design it. Back in my government days, I worked on regional water access plans, specifically the zoning and management of public and private shoreline usage around inland lakes. I knew the language they were trying to weaponize. I knew the loopholes, the exceptions, the land use precedents. While Karen was copying sections from a half-understood HOA rulebook, I was reviewing state-level zoning codes in their original legislation format. I wasn't just building a defense, I was building a trap. But before I could spring it, I needed to solidify the facts. Ironclad on paper with names and stamps and signatures. So the next morning I made the 30-minute drive to the county recorder's office again. Roy was behind the counter. He saw me walk in and smiled like he'd been waiting. "Got what you needed?" he asked. "Just about," I said. "But I need to verify a few transfers. Early ones." He tilted his head. "How early?" 79 through 83. Particularly anything involving easement amendments or shoreline access grants for parcels B through F. He whistled. "You're looking for the old stuff." "Yep, the kind people assume don't matter anymore." It took 3 hours, but we found it. They're buried in a box labeled Legacy Unindexed Blue Lake Area. Was a faded easement contract hand-signed by my father and the then county supervisor. The language was clear. Exclusive access granted to parcel A my land for shoreline ingress, emergency use, and utilities infrastructure, no shared use authorized without written consent from the parcel owner. And there was more. We found a denial letter from 2003 when the original developers of the HOA community had tried to file for shared lake access through that same tract. It had been rejected due to conflict with pre-existing private easement agreement. No one had followed up. Meaning every time the HOA had used that gravel path, every kayak launch, every garden club, picnic, every kids' fishing derby, from the clubhouse dock they had done so illegally. Karen didn't just trespass. She built an entire community identity on a fantasy of ownership. And now I had the paper trail to prove it. I scanned everything, backed it up to the cloud, then emailed copies to my attorney Sandra Vega, a friend of a friend who specialized in property disputes and land use litigation. She was based 2 towns over, known for being patient, precise, and utterly relentless in court. The moment she read the easement file, she called me. "Walker," she said, not even bothering with small talk. "You've got them. Don't say another word to the HOA until I file." "Already stopped talking," I said. "Good. This isn't going to mediation. We're going straight for injunction damages, and if you want an injunction on their lake operations until they formally acquire legal access." "They'll never get that access," I said. "Not from me." There was a pause. "Then they're going to bleed," she said. "But legally." I liked her already. That evening, I sat down and wrote a letter, not to the HOA board, but to the homeowners. I kept it calm, professional, and factual. I attached the legal documents proving the easement, the 2003 denial, and the pending restraining order. I didn't rant. I didn't accuse. I simply told the truth. You've been misled. Your HOA does not have legal access to the lake. For 20 years, you've been using private land under false assumptions, now made worse by recent acts of vandalism and trespassing. Until this matter is resolved in court, lakefront access through my property is revoked. I apologize for the disruption this causes to families and children. But responsibility lies with those who misrepresented the boundaries of this land, not with me. Then I printed 30 copies, placed them in sealed envelopes, and hand-delivered them to each mailbox on the HOA's side of the lake under the cover of dusk. It didn't take long. By sunrise, my phone rang 3 times with unknown numbers. I ignored them. Then someone banged on my gate around 9:00 a.m. I ignored that too. But by noon, my email inbox started to fill with messages, not threats, not hate, but apologies. One woman wrote, "I had no idea we weren't allowed to use the lake. I feel sick about what Karen did to your cabin. I'm so sorry. Please let me know if there's anything I can do." Another man offered to help with repairs. A third offered to testify on my behalf. One of the HOA board members, Greg the treasurer, formally resigned and sent me a copy of his statement. And then came the cherry on top. A letter from the Yeek County Environmental Review Board. Apparently, someone from the HOA had tried to file an emergency request to reroute lake access around my property, proposing a new trail that would skirt the shore through wetlands behind the clubhouse. The board rejected it outright. The area was protected, and any construction would require years of environmental studies, tribal consultations, and impact assessments. The HOA had no case, no leverage, and now, thanks to their own desperation, no sympathy. Karen, of course, didn't go quietly. She held a special meeting in the clubhouse that weekend. I didn't attend, but someone left a copy of her agenda taped to my gate. The title, Community Response to Unlawful Land Seizure. I laughed out loud. She was still spinning it, still pretending that I'd stolen something from them, as if a lifetime of silence and generosity could be overwritten by her narrative. But the lake didn't care about her version of the story, and now neither did her neighbors. That night, I sat with my feet in the water, letting the cold soak into my bones. For the first time since they ripped the boards off my father's porch, I felt something like peace, because they thought I was just some old man in a quiet cabin by the lake. What they didn't know was that I'd spent my whole life learning how to build dams, and now I was finally letting the pressure go. The thing about pressure is it doesn't always explode. Sometimes it holds, it gathers, builds in silence until the system itself begins to hum like a tensioned wire ready to snap. That was the neighborhood in the days following my letter drop. The shift in energy was palpable. The cheerful waves and forced small talk had disappeared, replaced instead with downcast glances, nervous pacing, and most telling of all, silence from Karen. For the first time in months, no new notices arrived at my property. No unsolicited courtesy inspections. No sudden lawn critiques or mailbox compliance updates. I kept expecting another knock, another letter, another stunt, but nothing came. And that in itself told me everything I needed to know. They were scared. Karen had overplayed her hand, and now that the homeowners had a taste of the truth, not from hearsay, but from stamped, signed, and undeniable county records, they began pulling away from her like rats abandoning a sinking ship. I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Because I knew the HOA wasn't finished. Desperate people don't walk away from power quietly. They regroup. They delay. And if they're smart, and Karen was smart in her way, they try to rewrite the story before anyone can write the ending for them. So while the surface was calm, I prepared for the second wave. I hired a private surveyor, independent licensed, and brutally thorough. He came out that Thursday, spent the entire day documenting the boundaries, markers, structures, and trails across both my land and the adjacent HOA-controlled parcels. He used a drone to map elevation points, and we included old forestry maps showing the land before the neighborhood was developed. I wasn't just shoring up my case, I was building a wall of facts they couldn't climb over. Meanwhile, Sandra, my attorney, was quietly moving forward with the civil case. She'd filed for an injunction to stop any further HOA maintenance within a 50-foot radius of my cabin and easement. We included photo evidence of the porch destruction voice recordings, the gate incident, and the long paper trail of violations and notices sent to a property they had no authority over. And we didn't stop there. Sandra filed a claim for damages, citing trespass, property destruction, emotional distress, and loss of use of property. We weren't just seeking an apology. We were going for their budget, their insurance, their sense of invincibility. It was surgical, deliberate, precise. And through it all, I said nothing. No community blasts, no town gossip, no retaliation in kind. I kept working on my cabin, reattaching the decking, rebuilding the bench beneath the window, repainting the cedar siding, all by hand. It felt right that way. Every board I drove in was a reclaiming, not just of wood, but of space, peace, memory. My neighbors noticed. One by one, they began showing up, not in crowds, but quietly. A man named Joel, who lived on the far end of the subdivision, brought over an extension cord to help with my power tools. "I don't agree with how they've treated you," he said. "And I think more of us feel the same. We were just scared." A retired school teacher named Nancy offered to testify on my behalf. She'd been on the board during the early years and remembered Karen pushing to claim the lake path even after being warned about the easement issue. "She said we'd deal with it later," Nancy told me. I didn't think dealing with it meant demolition. And perhaps most surprising of all, Brent, the HOA board member in khakis, showed up one evening with a manila folder of his own. "I resigned," he said simply, "and I brought you something." Inside the folder were meeting notes, internal memos, emails between board members discussing the strategy to label my cabin as abandoned, the legal theories Karen had floated to justify emergency removal, and even an invoice for the demolition crew signed by Karen herself. "Why are you giving me this?" I asked. He looked tired, older than I remembered. "Because it's wrong," he said, "and because I don't want to be part of it when the whole damn thing burns down." That was the moment I realized I wasn't the only one preparing for a reckoning. Karen was too. But she was doing it behind closed doors, trying to reframe the narrative before court day came. She started putting out emails to the community about recent misunderstandings and property ambiguities inherited from prior boards. She even suggested a mediation path forward, conveniently timed before our court filing reached a judge. I said no. Sandra said hell no. Because this wasn't about compromise anymore. This was about accountability. About showing people that just because someone wears pearls and speaks with authority doesn't mean they're right. So we waited. And while we waited, I built. The porch came together quickly, stronger than before, reinforced with steel brackets. I replaced the old screen with storm-grade glass panels, installed motion sensor lights, fixed the path lights along the easement trail even if no one would use them for now. And then one morning, I did something that no one expected. I installed a second gate, but not at the front, at the lakefront. This one was clean cedar, beautifully built with a carved wooden sign overhead. Private shoreline entry by consent only. It wasn't spiteful, it wasn't barricaded, it was just clear. And that made it powerful. Because for the first time in years, the boundary was visible, not just in paperwork or court documents, but in real life. There was no more pretending, no more invisible lines or assumed permissions. There was the cabin, there was the gate, and there was me, waiting, because the calm was almost over, and the storm they'd set in motion was about to come home. It was a Tuesday morning when the scream came. Not a scream of fear, but of frustration, sharp, high-pitched, unmistakably feminine, and carried clean across the lake like a hawk's cry. I had just come back from the post office, fresh coffee in hand, when I heard it. I stepped out onto the new porch and looked across the path. There she was, Karen, standing at the lake gate, clutching her phone in one hand, the other curled into a fist at her side. Her pristine white blazer was wrinkled hair pulled too tight, posture rigid like a statue about to crack. I didn't say a word, I just leaned on the rail and watched. She spotted me. Her eyes narrowed into slits, and for a moment I could see her fighting the urge to storm across the gravel. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the freshly painted private shoreline sign. Maybe it was the motion sensor camera blinking above the post. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the weight of weeks of unraveling control that finally caught up to her. Instead, she turned huffed and stormed back toward the clubhouse path. I took a sip of my coffee. It tasted like justice. By the end of the day, the sign had gone viral, at least by neighborhood standards. Photos of the gate were posted on the community Facebook page. Nextdoor even read it. One image showed the path with the gate in the foreground and the lake shining behind it, captioned, "HOA president loses access to her lake after bulldozing a retiree's cabin." Oops. The comments were relentless. Karen strikes again. She trespassed and got slapped. I thought the HOA owned that trail. They didn't. He's owned it since before half of us were born. By evening, the clubhouse parking lot was half full residents, trickling into what had been hastily dubbed an emergency open board meeting. I wasn't invited, naturally. But that didn't stop people from sending me updates. One neighbor, Tom, live texted half the meeting from the back row. Tom. She's saying you forged the survey. Me. I hired a licensed state surveyor. Tom. Yeah, she just got fact-checked. Greg just stood up with a map from the recorder's office. Tom. People are mad, man. Really mad. Tom. Someone just said she cost them resale value. Tom. She's sweating. I think she's going to cry. Tom. Oh. She just stormed out. Mic drop. I set my phone down and exhaled. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, not exactly. It was relief. Because for months, I had been the villain in her story, the outsider, the holdout, the defector, who refused to play nice. And now finally people saw her for what she was, not a leader, but a tyrant with a board title. The following morning, I got a knock on the door. It was Olivia. She looked different, no clipboard, no neat little blazer. Just jeans and a sweatshirt, hair pulled back, face open. I wanted to apologize, she said, and tell you something. I opened the door fully and stepped aside. Come in. She didn't sit. She just stood near the window watching the sunlight on the water as she spoke. We voted last night. Karen's been removed as president. The board's reorganizing. Honestly, most of us were just trying to keep things calm. We didn't know how far she'd taken it. But the lawsuit, the gate, it woke people up. I didn't interrupt. I wanted to hear it all. She's still on the board technically, Olivia added. But I think she'll step down soon. She has no support left. I nodded. And the access trail? She hesitated. We're not contesting it. Not anymore. We'll reroute through our own parcel even if it takes time. We understand now. You were generous for decades, and we abused that. That was the first time someone had said it out loud. Abused. Not misunderstood, not overlooked. Abused. She looked at me waiting. I let the silence linger before I spoke. Thank you for coming, I said. But understand something. This land, this shoreline, this cabin, it's not a park. It's my home. It was my father's. You don't get to use it just because it's pretty. You don't get to claim it because it's convenient. That time is over. She nodded. Her eyes were glassy. I know, she whispered. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I believed her. After she left, I sat on the porch for a long time, watching, listening, and thinking. Part of me wanted to keep the gate locked forever. Let them learn to paddle across or build a proper dock of their own. But another part of me, the part that remembered kids laughing near the water, the quiet joy of old men fishing at sunrise, wondered if maybe, just maybe, there could be room for healing. But not yet. They hadn't earned that. Not all of them. That weekend, I received the official notice. Karen Withers had resigned. The HOA board issued a formal statement acknowledging her overreach and announcing a new commitment to transparency and respect for property lines. They called it a new chapter. I didn't care what they called it. I just knew it had come at a cost. The cabin was still scarred. The old bench could never be rebuilt the way my father had made it. Some things once broken don't go back the same. But I had something better than restoration. I had proof that silence isn't the same as surrender. And that boundaries, real ones, emotional ones, legal ones, matter. A few days later, I repainted the sign on the front gate. Not to make it prettier, to make it clearer. Private shoreline closed until further notice. Trespass will be prosecuted. No more warnings. No more forgiveness for arrogance disguised as neighborly concern. I'd played nice once. They thought it made me weak. They were wrong. Karen may have resigned from the presidency, but she didn't vanish quietly. For weeks after the HOA's official statement, there were subtle signs that she was still pulling strings behind the scenes, emails sent through alternate accounts, anonymous posts on community forums defending her actions, quiet whispers among the more loyal homeowners suggesting that I had manipulated the law to block lake access for my own benefit. It didn't matter that the facts were public stamped and archived. For Karen, truth had always been more about perception than reality. And now that perception was crumbling fast, she was flailing. The first major sign of her unraveling came during a Saturday town hall hosted by the HOA's new interim president, a soft-spoken man named Leonard Meyer. I hadn't planned to attend, but Leonard personally invited me. We want to listen this time, he said, not dictate. So I went. Not to fight, not to gloat, just to listen. It was held at the community center, a tall windowed building near the northern bluff. When I walked in, I could feel the shift immediately. This wasn't the usual HOA theater. There were no smug introductions, no rulebook readings, no Karen in the front row with her fake smile and manicured notes. Instead, there was quiet tension. Residents sat in folding chairs, some sipping coffee, others holding printed copies of the easement documents I'd circulated. Up front, Leonard stood alone. He cleared his throat, welcomed everyone, and then did something no one expected. He handed me the microphone. Mr. Walker, he said, I believe the floor belongs to you. I didn't prepare a speech. I didn't need one. I spoke simply. My name is Jack Walker. I've lived here since before most of these homes were built. My father built the cabin I live in with his own hands, and for over 40 years, we respected the land, the lake, and every neighbor who came and went. For decades, I let the HOA use my private access trail to the lake. I never charged anyone, never made a fuss. I did it out of courtesy. And then one day, someone decided that kindness looked like weakness. That silence meant permission. And they tore apart what they didn't own, assuming I wouldn't push back. Well, I did, and I'll keep doing it. Because the law matters, boundaries matter, and no title or clipboard gives anyone the right to take what isn't theirs. When I handed the mic back, there was no applause, just stillness. And in that stillness, understanding. Then came the second eruption, the one that truly showed how much Karen had lost control. It started with a Facebook post. A resident named Tracy Young Mom always neutral posted screenshots of an email she received from a fake account claiming to be concerned about Walker's threats to the neighborhood. But the language was unmistakable. "It's her," Tracy wrote. "She's still trying to spin this." More screenshots followed. Then a PDF surfaced titled, "Walker's War on the Lake." A sloppy Word document turned pamphlet, accusing me of weaponizing old land grants to punish innocent families. It included distorted photos of my cabin, falsely claimed I'd installed electric fencing, and implied I had secret ties to out-of-town developers trying to privatize the lake. It was absurd, but it was enough to trigger a response. The community forum lit up. Some people bought into it at first. Others knew better. But the chaos served Karen's purpose. She didn't need to win. She just needed to cast enough doubt to poison the well. The same strategy she'd always used as president: stir confusion, manufacture urgency, control the narrative. But this time it backfired, because the more people dug, the more they found. Karen hadn't just overstepped with me, she'd misused HOA funds for personal landscaping, rerouted irrigation for her backyard garden, and approved vendor contracts that conveniently tied back to a cousin's company in another county. The whispers turned into receipts. By the end of the week, a group of residents called for a full audit of HOA finances. Leonard approved it. And within 2 days, Karen was facing formal censure. I didn't lift a finger. They were tearing her down on their own. And still she didn't stop. One morning, I found a note taped to the lake gate written in curling cursive. "We could have shared this, Jack. We could have had peace. But you chose war. And now no one wins." No signature. But I didn't need one. I left it there, flapping in the breeze. Let people see what desperation looks like. That night, Sandra called me with news. "The court date's been moved up," she said. "Judge saw the emergency filings. He's reviewing the damage claims himself." Also, Karen tried to file a counterclaim. I sat back. "On what grounds?" "She says you acted in bad faith by allowing lake access for years, then suddenly cutting it off without warning." I laughed. Bad faith. After they ripped my porch apart, Sandra didn't laugh. Her voice turned steely. "Don't worry. I already filed the response. And I've attached the entire history, timestamps, letters, the trespassing video, everything, including that pamphlet." "She's digging her own hole," I said. Sandra exhaled, "and we're just letting her fall into it." By now, the gate had become symbolic, not just a barrier, but a line in the sand. People stopped by daily just to see it. Some to take pictures, others to apologize. I didn't let anyone through, not yet. They had to learn. Because Karen wasn't just one woman with a title. She was a symptom of entitlement, of weaponized order, of the belief that leadership meant domination. And as she unraveled, post by post, lie by lie, something remarkable happened. The neighborhood began to wake up. They started questioning rules, started organizing votes, started pulling weeds from the foundation she built. And I kept building. Because justice doesn't always look like a courtroom victory. Sometimes it looks like a sign. Clean, clear, unshakable. And sometimes it sounds like silence, not the frightened kind, but the kind that follows a scream no one listens to anymore. Karen had panicked, and in doing so, she revealed the truth about herself. I didn't have to fight her. She collapsed all on her own. I wore my father's old corduroy blazer to court. Not because it was fancy, it wasn't. The elbows were scuffed, the collar soft with age. But it had weight to it, presence. The way a flag holds presence, even in a storm. He used to wear it to every city meeting, every permit hearing. Said it made him feel just professional enough to remind people he wasn't to be ignored. That morning, standing in front of the mirror, I understood what he meant. The courthouse was modest. Brick building, small town charm, the kind of place where legal matters still smelled like paper and coffee. Inside the hearing room had maybe 20 seats, half filled with curious neighbors, HOA members, and a few reporters from the local paper. Karen wasn't among them. Not yet. Sandra was already there, calm as ever, reviewing notes. She gave me a nod and passed me a folder. "All set," she said. "Everything's been submitted electronically, but the judge appreciates hard copies." I took a seat beside her. Across the room, Leonard and Olivia sat together, stiff-backed and silent. I gave them a nod. Leonard nodded back. Olivia looked at the floor. Then the door opened. Karen entered like she was still queen. A fitted navy suit, gold chain necklace, sunglasses perched on her head like a tiara. She carried a leather briefcase more for show than function and wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her attorney, some polished man from a mid-tier firm in the city, followed close behind, flipping through a tablet. He looked like he hadn't spent a minute studying the case beyond what she told him. That would become clear soon enough. When the judge, Honorable Marcia Rowland, entered the room, the energy shifted. She was late 50s, steel gray hair, no-nonsense eyes. She looked like someone who had zero patience for drama and even less for misuse of public resources. "Let's begin," she said, her voice low but firm. Case number 18 CV432. Jack Walker versus Lakeside HOA et al. Parties, please identify yourselves for the record. Sandra stood. Sandra Vega representing Mr. Walker, the plaintiff. Karen's lawyer rose, too quickly. Stephen Maxton representing Lakeside HOA, and in a separate motion counterclaiming on behalf of Karen Withers in a private capacity. The judge frowned. That counterclaim was filed late and remains under review. We'll start with the primary matter: trespass, destruction of property, and violation of easement boundaries. What followed was surgical. Sandra began with the timeline. The history of the property. The easement. The original county plat map. The signed documents. Then came the drone footage, the demolition video, the emails from the HOA board, and perhaps most damning, the receipts Brent had provided, including the HOA's own internal notes referring to my land as an ongoing obstacle. Karen shifted uncomfortably for the first time. Then Sandra introduced the photos: my cabin's porch sawed, beams, dismantled boards, and the note left by Karen labeling it non-compliant. She read aloud the text of the fabricated violation letter, which had no legal standing and which misrepresented the HOA's authority over land never included in their governing charter. Stephen tried to object. "Your Honor, the HOA acted in good faith." Judge Rowland held up a hand. "I've reviewed the HOA's charter. Mr. Walker's parcel is clearly outside of jurisdiction. The board had no legal standing to interfere with his property. If there was concern about safety, the proper avenue was through the County Code Enforcement Office, not self-directed demolition." Stephen sat back down, red creeping up his neck. Then came Karen's turn. She was called to testify, and against her lawyer's advice, she agreed. Sandra didn't have to work hard. Karen did most of the damage herself. She admitted to ordering the clearance without a court order. She admitted she'd never reviewed the original easement documentation. She claimed bizarrely that the public had customary rights to the lake path due to decades of peaceful use. Sandra just smiled and said, "You mean the decades Mr. Walker permitted access out of neighborly goodwill?" Karen hesitated. Yes, but he never revoked it until you demolished his property." "I didn't demolish it. You hired a contractor. The HOA hired the contractor. You were HOA president. You signed the invoice. Do you dispute this signature?" Karen looked at the screen where the invoice glowed enlarged, her name printed clearly. She swallowed. "No." When it was over, the judge called a recess. I stepped outside to breathe. Neighbors stood near the courthouse steps, quiet, awkward. Some avoided my eyes. Others nodded at me. One woman placed a hand gently on my shoulder and whispered, "You're doing the right thing." Sandra joined me, sipping her coffee. "She imploded," I said. Sandra raised an eyebrow. She was never stable to begin with. We went back inside. The ruling came swiftly. "Based on the presented evidence, I find in favor of Mr. Walker," Judge Rowland said. "The HOA trespassed onto private property without legal standing and carried out unauthorized demolition. Damages will be awarded in the amount of $47,900 for property destruction and emotional distress. The HOA is also ordered to issue a formal written apology and public acknowledgement of the easement's private status." Karen's face drained of color, but the judge wasn't finished. In addition, the court issues a permanent injunction barring the HOA from accessing or directing others to access Mr. Walker's easement without express written permission. Any further violation will be considered criminal trespass. Silence. Then the judge turned to Stephen. "As for the counterclaim, it's dismissed with prejudice." Karen stood, lips parted like she might argue, but her attorney pulled her back down with a whispered word. And just like that, it was over. Outside, the air felt lighter, brighter. I'd won more than money or property rights. I'd reclaimed my voice. I walked down the courthouse steps into a gathering of quiet applause. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just walked straight ahead, the wind on my face, and the weight of a legacy on my shoulders, lighter now, finally. Behind me, Karen stood frozen, watching the last sliver of power she clung to slip through her fingers like sand. The days after the ruling moved with the quiet dignity of winter thawing into spring, not with celebration, but with relief. There were no parades, no public statements from me, no yard signs boasting of victory. Just a neighborhood, slowly learning how to breathe again, now that the weight of Karen's thumb had been lifted from its windpipe. And me, I finally got to return to the one thing that had been taken from me without warning: stillness. I spent my mornings walking the property, clearing the path not for public use, but for my own peace of mind. The cabin, now sturdier than it had been in years, seemed to stand taller, like it had survived something it was never built for. I replaced the broken porch swing, polished the railings until they glowed like honey in the afternoon sun. I planted salvia along the gate, a splash of purple to contrast the cedar. Neighbors came here and there, some just to nod, some to apologize again. One older gentleman, George from Lot 22, brought over a small crate of fishing lures and said, "These were my father's. I think yours would have wanted you to have them now." I took them with both hands, said nothing. Sometimes gratitude doesn't need words. What surprised me most, though, was how the new HOA board handled their loss. Leonard, now officially voted in as president, reached out a week after the ruling. He didn't come with excuses or olive branches, just a plain manila envelope hand-delivered containing a formal apology letter signed by every current board member, a copy of the amended HOA guidelines now explicitly stating they held no authority over and land outside their jurisdiction, and most strikingly, a proposal. And they wanted to build a new access trail, this time fully on HOA-owned land. It would be more expensive, less convenient. The terrain wasn't ideal, but it would be theirs, legally and properly. At the bottom of the proposal, in Leonard's handwriting, were 6 words. "You were right. We'll earn it." That struck deeper than any lawsuit win. I didn't reply immediately. I let it sit. Meanwhile, Karen. She vanished from view. No more anonymous posts, no appearances at meetings. Word was she'd quietly sold her home and moved in with her daughter in Florida. Whether that was shame strategy or just exhaustion, I didn't know. And I didn't care. Justice doesn't always need to be witnessed. Sometimes it's enough that it arrives. With her gone, things began to shift. Children's laughter returned to the lake, though now from the HOA's side. They'd begun clearing a new path slowly and legally. No shortcuts. No silent encroachments. I watched from afar, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. One afternoon, Olivia came to the gate. She stood for a moment not speaking, then held up a small thermos and said, "Peace offering." I nodded, and she stepped through only after I opened the gate myself. We sat on the porch, 2 cups of coffee between us, and watched the water shift in the wind. "I know it doesn't mean much now," she said, "but I really did think we were doing what was best, back then." "You thought keeping quiet was safer than confronting her," I said, not unkindly. "I get it." She looked down. "We let her represent all of us. But she only ever represented herself." I let that settle, then asked, "Why'd you stay after she fell?" She looked at the lake, eyes distant. "Because someone had to help rebuild. You don't fix something by walking away from it." That I respected. After she left, I took the envelope Leonard had given me and pulled out the proposal again. I reviewed the sketches, the route, the zoning applications. It was clean, lawful, respectful. And for the first time, I considered saying yes. But not yet. They had to finish what they started without stepping over the line again. A week later, Leonard sent an update. The county had approved the trail permit. Groundbreaking would begin in the fall. In the meantime, he asked if I'd be willing to serve on a new advisory council, not to oversee, but to provide historical context and property education, so something like this would never happen again. I declined. Not because I was bitter, I wasn't, but because I didn't want to become what Karen had been, the gatekeeper, the figure of authority. I had no interest in ruling anything. I just wanted my peace back. Instead, I offered them something simpler. I sent a letter. "You may continue using the trail behind Parcel F until construction is complete under the following conditions. 1. No vehicles. 2. No permanent structures. 3. No assumption of ownership. I do this not as permission, but as a gesture of goodwill. Please don't mistake one for the other." It was signed plainly with no flourish. Jack Walker, Parcel A. 2 days later, a group of teenagers from the neighborhood came down to fish off the rocky shore. They didn't make noise, didn't litter. They waved to me on the porch shyly, and I waved back. Because real power, is quiet. It doesn't need fences to prove itself. It just stands like old cedar beams, solid after a storm. The lake was still again. Not empty, not silent. But still in the way that old places can be when their battles are finally done. It was late autumn by the time the new HOA trail was finished. Tucked along the far bluff, it curled through a patch of young saplings, skirted the wetlands respectfully, and finally emerged at the opposite side of the shoreline, far from my cabin, far from the easement that had become the center of our little civil war. And for the first time in a long while, I stood at my gate and felt no tension behind my ribcage, no prickling on the back of my neck. Just air, just space. Just the sound of the breeze lifting across water and branches soft like a memory. People came from time to time. Not many, not in droves, but enough. A father with 2 boys, one of them casting a line too far and getting caught in the reeds. A pair of retirees who used to walk the path every Sunday before things went sour. They stood quietly just beyond the fence one morning, then turned away, not expecting anything. I opened the gate for them. Didn't say a word. Just nodded. They smiled. The woman mouthed, "Thank you." Sometimes, healing is like that, a slow motion made up of small kindnesses between people who once stood on opposite sides of a line they never fully understood. I didn't remove the sign. It still hung above the gate. Private shoreline entry by consent only. But underneath it, I added something new carved into a strip of aged oak from the original porch beam my father built. Respect is not given by title. It is earned by behavior. No one painted over it. No one questioned it. They just read it and walked carefully. And that was enough. One afternoon, I found a letter tucked beneath a stone on the porch steps. No envelope, no return address, just folded paper soft with handling. I opened it and recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Karen. "You were right. About the power. About the boundary." I thought I could shape this neighborhood into something perfect, but I confused control with leadership. I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope one day, if you're ever sitting on that porch and see someone struggling with their need to be in charge, you might remind them what real stewardship looks like. You lived it. I read it once. Then I read it again. Then I burned it. Not out of spite, out of closure. Because forgiveness is a quiet act, and I'd already given it to the land, to the lake, to the people who'd stood by and said nothing. And to myself. I'd forgiven the part of me that thought silence would protect what mattered most. I'd learned that boundaries, physical, legal, emotional, aren't selfish. They're sacred. They tell others how to treat what you cherish. And if you don't defend them, someone will walk right through with a clipboard and a smile and a chainsaw. The HOA never tried anything again. They sent me cards on holidays. Asked once, very formally, if they could host a community fishing event on the new trail. I said yes, so long as they kept it clean and quiet. They did. And they never asked to come back across the gate. But they didn't need to, because they understood now. There's a kind of peace that doesn't come from winning. It comes from surviving, from standing your ground without raising your voice, from reclaiming what was always yours, not to hoard, but to protect. I sat on the porch the night before the first frost, wrapped in my father's old quilt, watching the moon ripple across the lake. A soft mist rose silver in the air. Somewhere in the trees, an owl called out once, low and long. I closed my eyes, felt the earth settle beneath me, and I whispered just loud enough for the wind to carry. I held the line, "Dad, just like you taught me." And the water, always listening, whispered back,